How does one man control thousands without ever holding office? What if the most dangerous people never look dangerous? Who protects evil when it wears a respectable face? These questions are not philosophical. They are historical. And they orbit one name that still unsettles the modern world: Jeffrey Edward Epstein. This story is not about fame. It is not about scandal. It is about power without visibility, abuse without consequence, and a system that mistook wealth for virtue and silence for stability. Jeffrey Epstein did not rise screaming. He did not rule through force. He did not need authority. He ruled through access. To the outside world, Epstein appeared unremarkable. A quiet financier, a private man, a benefactor, a networker among elites. He wore tailored suits, spoke softly, and avoided attention. He appeared in the backgrounds of photographs, never the center. He sat at dinner tables with presidents, princes, scientists, and billionaires, yet rarely spoke publicly himself. That was the first illusion. Epstein understood something most people never do: power is strongest when it does not announce itself. Those who met him often described him as intelligent, reserved, even generous. He funded research. He donated to institutions. He advised the wealthy. He moved invisibly between worlds of finance, politics, academia, and influence. And while society applauded the surface, something underneath was already rotting. Jeffrey Epstein was born in 1953 in Brooklyn, New York, into a working-class Jewish family. His early life was not marked by privilege. His parents were educators. His upbringing was structured, modest, and disciplined. There were no obvious signs of the darkness to come. No public violence. No criminal record. No dramatic trauma, but there were silences. Former classmates recalled a boy who was intelligent but distant. Observant. Calculating. He learned quickly how to adapt his behavior to authority figures, saying what was needed, withholding what was not. Epstein learned early that information is currency and attention is leverage. He excelled academically but lacked something harder to measure: emotional connection. Teachers noted brilliance, but not warmth. Peers remembered confidence without closeness. It was subtle. And that is how danger begins. In his 20s, Epstein began teaching at an elite private school despite lacking formal qualifications. The fact that he was hired at all would later raise questions, but at the time, it was simply another example of doors opening where they should not have. He learned how power moved among the privileged. He learned how trust was assumed, not earned, and most importantly, he learned that institutions often protect their image before they protect people. This lesson would shape everything that followed. When Epstein left teaching, he entered finance, a world where secrecy is not only tolerated but rewarded. Through connections rather than credentials, he gained access to wealth management circles few ever penetrate. No one asked too many questions. They rarely do when money appears. Epstein's rise did not happen overnight. It unfolded through a series of small permissions. A favor here, an introduction there, a closed-door meeting, a private flight. Each moment seemed insignificant alone. Together, they formed a structure. He cultivated relationships with those who could grant him protection: legal, financial, reputational. He positioned himself as useful, as discreet, as loyal, and he learned something crucial: people with power fear exposure more than they fear wrongdoing. This fear would become his shield. By the time Epstein reached the highest levels of society, the pattern was already established. Access without oversight. Wealth without transparency. Influence without accountability. Behind the doors of private estates and exclusive gatherings, something else was growing, something hidden behind non-disclosure agreements, settlements, and silence. The world would not see it yet, but it was there, waiting, and the systems meant to protect the vulnerable were already failing. This story will not rush, because the truth did not rush either. It waited, and when it finally surfaced, it would expose not just one man, but an entire culture that mistook respectability for innocence. The veil has begun to lift. Power rarely announces itself with trumpets. More often, it arrives quietly, through introductions, private rooms, and unrecorded favors. By the late 1970s, Jeffrey Epstein was no longer the obscure mathematics teacher from Brooklyn. He had learned how to enter rooms where decisions were made, fortunes were shaped, and questions were discouraged. He did not force his way in. He was invited. Epstein understood something essential about elite society: belonging mattered more than proof. If the right person vouched for you, credentials became irrelevant. If the right door opened, no one asked who unlocked it, and Epstein became very good at finding doors. Epstein's transition into high finance remains one of the first great unanswered questions of his story. He lacked the formal education, licensing, and public track record typical of those managing immense wealth. Yet somehow, he found himself advising powerful individuals and handling sensitive financial matters. This did not happen because of brilliance alone, it happened because Epstein positioned himself as useful. He did not present himself as a visionary or a leader. He presented himself as a problem solver, discreet, flexible, and loyal. He promised privacy in a world where privacy was vanishing. And for the wealthy, privacy was worth more than profit. One unnoticed deal followed another. One introduction led to another circle. Epstein learned to speak differently depending on the room. With academics, he spoke of science and progress. With financiers, he spoke of optimization and opportunity. With politicians, he spoke of influence without ideology. He mirrored those around him, and they trusted what looked familiar. Those who encountered Epstein often remarked on his calm demeanor. He was not flamboyant. He did not dominate conversations. He listened. He remembered details. He followed up. This was not kindness. It was strategy. Epstein used attention as a currency. When powerful people spoke, he absorbed their insecurities, ambitions, and fears. He stored information quietly, never brandishing it, never threatening. Just knowing, and knowing gave him leverage. He made people feel important. He made them feel understood. And slowly, without confrontation, he made them complicit, because once someone accepts a favor, even a small one, the balance shifts. As Epstein's wealth appeared to grow, so did his circle. He purchased properties not just as homes, but as instruments of access. Residences became gathering points. Invitations became status symbols, and with status came silence. He surrounded himself with attorneys, accountants, and advisors whose job was not to question, but to protect. Contracts were layered. Transactions obscured. Ownership structures fractured. This was not accidental. Epstein was constructing something more durable than money. He was building insulation. Every layer made scrutiny harder. Every complexity discouraged curiosity. And institutions, banks, firms, regulators, often chose convenience over confrontation. It was easier not to look. There were moments when Epstein's rise should have stopped: questions about his finances, concerns about his associations, rumors that felt out of place. But each time, something intervened: a recommendation, a reputation, a powerful name attached to his own. And the system adjusted itself to accommodate him. This was not a conspiracy in the traditional sense. It was something more mundane and more dangerous: collective indifference. No single person felt responsible. No single institution felt empowered. Each assumed someone else had verified him, and so no one did. At some point in every rise, there is a test, a moment when boundaries are pushed to see if they hold. For Epstein, that moment came when he realized he could act without consequence. He discovered that complaints dissolved before reaching daylight. That questions could be redirected. That settlements could silence. This realization changed him, because once someone learns they are untouchable, restraint becomes optional. From that point forward, Epstein no longer merely benefited from the system. He began to exploit it. Money did not just buy Epstein comfort. It bought him credibility. Philanthropy softened his image. Donations opened doors to universities and research institutions. His name appeared alongside progress, innovation, and intellect. Few stopped to ask why a man with such influence avoided transparency. Few questioned why his wealth had no clear origin, and fewer still asked who might be paying the price for his ascent, because asking would have meant risk, and risk is something institutions avoid, even when morality demands it. The rise of Jeffrey Epstein was not just the story of one man climbing. It was the story of a society trained to equate wealth with worth, and confidence with character. Every unchecked privilege reinforced the illusion. Every ignored warning strengthened his position. By the time his name was known in elite circles, it was already too late. The shield was complete, and behind it, something far darker was taking shape. What began as access was becoming control. What began as silence was becoming complicity. The system had not just failed to stop him, it had helped him become dangerous. The rise always feels abstract in hindsight. Polished. Impressive. Harmless, but power without accountability does not remain neutral. It corrodes. In the next chapter, the story moves from boardrooms to bedrooms, from influence to exploitation, from whispers to victims. This is where the consequences begin. Every system built without accountability eventually reveals its true purpose. For Jeffrey Epstein, that moment did not arrive suddenly. It unfolded quietly, behind closed doors, in private spaces protected by wealth, fear, and silence. What the public would later call crimes were, for years, carefully disguised as arrangements, favors, misunderstandings, anything but what they truly were. This was not chaos, it was design. The first accounts followed a familiar structure. Young individuals from vulnerable backgrounds. Promises that sounded harmless. Opportunities framed as help. Tasks described as temporary, easy, and confidential. Nothing about it felt criminal at first. That was the point. Epstein understood that control begins long before coercion. It begins with normalization. With small steps that do not trigger alarms. With gradual boundary shifts that make resistance feel unreasonable. Victims would later describe the same confusion. A sense that something was wrong, but not yet nameable. A pressure that came not from force, but from expectation, and behind every encounter was the same imbalance: age, wealth, power, and isolation. Epstein rarely acted alone. He did not need to. His operations relied on a network of intermediaries, individuals who blurred the line between victim and accomplice, sometimes unknowingly, sometimes under pressure. Recruitment often came through trust. A recommendation from someone familiar. A reassurance that nothing bad would happen. A reminder that refusal would disappoint someone important. This was psychological leverage. Not physical restraint. Once inside Epstein's world, escape became complicated. Dependence formed. Fear grew. The awareness that speaking out could destroy not only one's own life, but the lives of others. Silence became survival. Many victims later described a moment, often small, often quiet, when understanding struck: a locked door, an unexpected demand, a look that replaced politeness with entitlement. In that moment, the truth surfaced. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not generosity. This was control. But by then, options felt limited. Epstein relied on that realization arriving too late. What makes abuse of this nature endure is not just the actions of the abuser, but the environment that absorbs them. Epstein operated in a world where consequences were negotiable, where settlements replaced justice, where silence was purchased and paperwork erased history. Complaints were minimized, testimony questioned, reputations weighed more heavily than harm, and each time the system failed to respond, the message was reinforced: he could continue. This was the point of no return. Once someone learns that suffering produces no consequence, cruelty becomes routine. Behind every allegation was a life altered, education interrupted, families fractured, trust destroyed. Some victims carried shame that was never theirs to bear. Others struggled to be believed. Many lived with the knowledge that the person who harmed them remained powerful, admired, untouched. This imbalance inflicted damage beyond the immediate act. It rewrote how victims saw the world. Authority became threatening. Institutions felt hollow. Justice seemed selective. The damage extended outward, into communities, into families, into futures that never fully formed. As years passed, the scale widened: more locations, more intermediaries, more confidence. Epstein's behavior escalated not because he lost control, but because he had too much of it. He moved between jurisdictions. He relied on legal complexity to fragment accountability. He counted on the exhaustion of those trying to stop him, and still, he remained protected, not because everyone approved,